Hello everyone and welcome to TV Talks, the show where I take a look at both the good and the bad of what television has to offer. It's season 5 of The Simpsons at last, and after season 4 was such a big hit, The Simpsons was unstoppable, so they wanted to prove it with this next season. They wanted to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and by golly they did! And up until this point, this season has been my favorite. Now, I decided to forego that for this retrospect because I'm looking at all the seasons with fresh new eyes, but before I actually began this thing, this was my favorite season. Not only did it hold my favorite episode of the whole show, which you'll find out what that is pretty soon, but it also had some of the greatest episodes of all time and some of the best quotes to ever originate from the show. What do I mean? Well, let's just jump right in and see what I'm talking about. Homer's Barbershop Quartet is the first one in the season. Homer, Apu, Skinner, and Chief Wiggum, then later replaced by Barney, start a barbershop quartet called the B-Sharps. They're a big hit, everyone loves them, and then it's kind of a giant parody of the Beatles in a sense. This one has a lot of really good jokes about the music scene, as per expected, my favorite one being the jokes about the Grammy Awards. The Yoko Ono stuff that they throw in is also really great with what she orders at Moe's Bar and what she tries to turn all their music into. It also kind of seems like a parody of That Thing You Do. If any of you ever know what that movie is, you'll probably know what I'm talking about. The only real negative for this one is I don't understand how it fits in continuity-wise and why no one ever mentions it again, but it's still really good regardless. The opening scene does go on a bit long, but you know what? You don't care because all the jokes are great with that flea market scene. It's really good, and then of course it just gets better and better the deeper they get into the big musical history of the B-Sharps. And of course they have that nice parody ending at the very end. It's a decent way to start off the season, but it's only going to get better from here. Cape Fear. So, this is the one I was talking about. Before this whole retrospect began, this was my favorite episode. Has that changed? Wait till the end of the video. So Cape Fear was my favorite ever since I saw this episode. Sideshow Bob is my all-time favorite character of The Simpsons, even though he only appears in about, one episode every season or two. And this is his episode this season. It's finally here, and actually, Bob is upping his game. He's not going to try to cheat some out of money and then, with that whole marriage scam, and he's not trying to take over Krusty's show. This time, he's just had it with Bart because Bart has been ruining all of his plans, so he's going to try to off him. And he's been sending him threatening letters, so the FBI relocates the Simpsons to Terror Lake, and they're now the Thompsons, which I love that redux of the opening that they have in there. And of course, Sideshow Bob tries to track him down and then kill him. Every single joke in this episode, every single one hits perfectly on point. The animation is extremely lively and fast, and also provides good ambiance, whether it be the dark and scary moments with Sideshow Bob, or just all the energy they throw into it. Because there's a lot of fast-moving stuff and a lot of exaggeration in this one. If the animation wasn't so good, the physical jokes wouldn't work, but they work every single time. The writing is some of the best. There's a joke every 10 seconds or so, and every single one hits the mark. And it's one of those episodes you gotta watch over and over again to pick up on all the jokes that they throw in. Because a lot of them are really, really subtle, and you have to be either watching or listening very carefully in order to see all the stuff coming. Not only is it a hilarious episode, but it also has good story. We see the evolution of Sideshow Bob's character. At first he was a well-meaning guy, then prison clearly hardened him a bit and he kinda changed. Then, in this one, he becomes a homicidal maniac whose life has been ruined, and he feels like that offing Bart Simpson will make everything all better. And this begins the slippery slope. Every time we see Sideshow Bob after this, he becomes increasingly more insane. And I love it. Is it any wonder why this is one of the fan favorite episodes? It's no wonder, because this one really is one of the best. Homer Goes to College, another Conan O'Brien episode. Ooh. He has written some really good ones last season, so let's see what he can do with this one. So, Mr. Burns finds out that Homer never graduated college, or never even really went, sort of. It's kind of complicated. And he's going to get fired if he doesn't get his degree in nuclear science. So, Homer decides to go off to college. A pretty standard plot on the surface, But then there's some interesting turns it takes. For one, Homer gets all his information on college life from 80s college movies, which, as we all know, are super exaggerated and over-romanticized. So Homer thinks that this is how everyone acts, like that there's jocks and nerds, and it's his duty as a jock to give nerds a hard time for no reason. That's almost word for word one of the quotes that he gives. And then, of course, he ends up rooming with a bunch of nerds, and he doesn't really think they're nerds. And then he ends up trying to pull off some big, wacky prank on this crusty old dean, as he thinks, but it's actually kind of a recent college graduate, really nice, really sympathetic dean, who is just the nicest guy on the planet, probably even related to Flanders, he's that nice. It's Homer being one of the dumbest he's been yet, but you can see where he's coming from, because he thinks this is how the world works. He has a reason to be this stupid, and of course it just gets better and better as the episode goes on. While there is one little issue with that, it doesn't stick to a plot, really. First it's Homer failing at the nuclear plant, then it's him going off to college, then it's him coming to terms with his roommates being nerds, then it's him pulling off the prank, then it's trying to get him and his friends back in school, and then it's him trying to pass the test again. While it does seem like a natural progression in some areas, other areas, it just kind of feels like they wanted to write a new episode, but they realized they only had a certain amount of episodes they could do this season, and hey, we already have a college one, so why not try to throw all this into there? It makes it feel a little jumbled, but with writing this good, that's easily forgivable. Rosebud. Mr. Burns has nightmares about his childhood bear, Bobo, and he desperately tries to search for it. Meanwhile, Maggie ends up finding it in a bag of ice, and Homer's debating on whether or not he should give in to Mr. Burns' negotiations and begging and evil schemes, or just let Maggie have the bear and be happy. This is one of those episodes where it's kind of story and kind of humor. It's kind of story on, you kind of see what Homer's going through on deciding which one to do. Give in to the evil Mr. Burns, or giving in to his daughter's happiness. Also, we see the inner trauma going on with Mr. Burns. And of course, it's a kind of a parody of Citizen Kane, with the opening scene there and the whole... Yeah, you get it. And of course, Mr. Burns goes to extreme lengths to get this bear back, and of course, it's just an old, moldy, falling apart bear, but it means the world to him, so of course he's gonna do things like cut off all the beer imports and turn off all the TVs in Springfield. Of course he'll do that. We also get a great Smithers' gay joke in here, the townspeople really turning a new leaf when they see Maggie with the bear. This episode just kind of builds and builds and gets better as we go on. It's got a nice atmosphere too, really nice homely feeling, while also getting a little bit bigger and cinematic towards the end. It's just good all around. The Treehouse of Horror 4, the fourth one, and by far the best one so far. Now I know I said that about last time, but this one is way better than last time. This one is fantastic. This is one of the ones that everyone thinks of when they hear Treehouse of Horror. The first segment is one of the most famous Treehouse of Horrors of all time. It's Homer wanting a donut, so he sells his soul to the devil for a single donut. And of course, the devil turns out to be Ned Flanders. I mean, who else would it be? But of course, it's always who we least expect it to be. And so then Homer accidentally eats the last piece, and then he gets sent to hell while his trial, I guess you could call it, is waiting to get started to see who really owns his soul. This one is hilarious. Everything they do with it is great. And if you go on the DVD and watch the deleted scenes that they have there, I can't believe they cut those out. They're so good. Everything in here is great. I wanted this to be like the full thing. I know they normally tell 3 stories, but it would have been great to see a whole episode with this stuff. And I know that you guys probably agree with me. Everything on here is fantastic. And then there's the next one where there's a monster on the bus that Bart's riding, and he keeps trying to tell everybody it's a big parody of a Twilight Zone episode, and it's good, but the devil one before it was far superior. But to be fair, even the Simpsons always acknowledge that their second story in the 3-story lineup is usually the weakest. But this one's far from bad. It's actually hilarious. My favorite part is Willie when he comes on the bus saying, "Oh, my mule wouldn't work in the rain. She was getting so tired, so I had to put 17 bullets in her." I don't know why, it gets me every time. And just how far everybody's sense of logic has dropped in this one. Oh, it's great. But even still, like I said, that last one still kind of looms over it and kind of makes this one kind of feel inferior. But then we get right back to the really, really, really good with the last one where Mr. Burns is Dracula, and it's a big parody of kind of Bram Stoker's Dracula as well as just vampires in general. Homer brings his family over to Mr. Burns' castle, and then he keeps trying to kill them and eat them and suck their blood and that kind of stuff. Every vampire joke you could possibly tell, they tell with this, and it always hits the mark. You can tell they really tried on this one, and that they really focused all their energy on this Treehouse of Horror one. And it shows, because these just keep getting better and better. I'm excited to see what next season has to offer. Marge on the Lam. Marge wants to spend time with Homer, but Homer keeps doing stupid stuff to make sure that he doesn't. Not on purpose, it's just by accident and dumb luck. So Marge ends up bonding with her neighbor Ruth Powers. And then after a very crazy girls' night of almost crime, sort of, it turns out that the car they were driving was stolen, and then Chief Wiggum initiates a police chase. I like this one, but it does have a lot of glaring issues. For one, the story of Marge on the Lam begins halfway through. The first half is just a lot of setup, which this story doesn't need a lot of setup. It really doesn't. You can kind of get the gist of what's going on pretty early on. The whole car chase thing lasts about 5 minutes. So it really shouldn't be Marge on the Lam, it should be like Marge's Night Out. That would probably be a better name for this one. But to be fair, the setup that they do have is really, really funny. Like the scene where they're at the bar and where they're shooting the cans off the fence. And then, of course, there's the B plot where Lionel Hutz ends up babysitting Bart and Lisa and then changes his identity, and it's all great. Or is it? Yeah, it really is. I mean, aside from the really strange pacing issues and the kind of non-ending, and the fact that we see Ruth Powers after this and none of this ever really gets acknowledged, and it looked like they were going to take her character in a new direction with this one, and it never really amounted to anything. As it stands, the episode is a really good one. It really is very well done, very well written. And yes, it does have some issues, but overall, the writing and jokes and all that are just so good that I'm willing to forego that. Just kind of like with Barbershop Quartet, only this one has a lot more issues. But like I said, not going to hold that against him. Bart's Inner Child. So, Homer buys a trampoline and everyone gets hurt on it. Then the second episode starts, and then everyone goes to a Brad Goodman speech thing. Brad Goodman is a motivational speaker, by the way, in this universe. He's not a real person. And everyone starts learning to be an inner child. Kind of like with how Bart is acting, and then the motivational speaker really likes it and tells everyone to be like boy, be like the boy. Except for the seniors think it's we like Roy. So then everyone just kind of does things that they feel like doing. And everyone gets wild and expressive. But then, of course, this gets too far. So I made a comment in this description saying, then the second episode starts and all. Because the first act is Homer buying a trampoline, which is, it's great. It's really great. I've said great so many times in this thing, but it really is. It's hilarious, but it doesn't really amount to anything in the rest of the episode. It really doesn't. But again, I'm willing to forgive that because even though the segue is very, very choppy, both of these parts are very well done. This is the first one this season that's from Bart's point of view, and wow, it took him long enough. We see the consequences of acting too much on your own impulses, on doing things without thinking or without rules and structure. Things are just gonna blow up in your face. And Bart learns that the hard way, but not through himself, through what he's done to the town. And of course the way that everyone's just kind of acting free and easy, we don't care what's going on. All of that is well done, and this one is the episode that confirms that Smithers is gay. Now, we have a lot of jokes leading up to it, and a lot of ones strongly hinting at it, like the one in Rosebud I mentioned earlier, but he explicitly says it in this one, because he tells Mr. Burns at the Do What You Feel Like festival that he loves him. Mr. Burns didn't hear him, though, so Smithers ends up changing what he said, and then feels like a coward for not going through with it. So, yep, Smithers is gay. So you hear that, modern Simpsons writers? We already knew that. We didn't need a big coming out episode. Yeah, I'll get to that one later. So, Bart's Inner Child, very good. What else can I say? Boy Scouts into Hood. After a huge squishy bender, Bart joins the junior campers, in other words, the Boy Scouts. Homer torments him endlessly for this because he thinks that they're all nerds. And then, of course, Ned Flanders is a scoutmaster, and Bart brings Homer along on a father-son rafting trip, and they get stuck with the Flanders, and it just gets bigger and more insane from there. Because Homer, obviously being in an environment he hates, with people he hates, and Bart, who gets on his nerves even though he doesn't really hate him, of course he's going to go a bit nuts. They all go nuts, but he goes the most insane out of all of them. And he tries to take over, tries to be a big authoritarian type, and show Bart that he knows more than stupid Flanders does. This is another one where all the jokes they try really, really work. I can't think of one that doesn't hit the mark. And a lot of the time, they're very surrealist jokes, whether they be the hallucinogen scenes from the first act with the squishy bender, or the other parts where Homer hallucinates, or the unmanned oil rig, Krusty Burger stuff, or the flare gun scene, or that strange guy who's lurking in the woods spying on the other rafters and makes a very strange and kind of creepy ending, which is also really hilarious. Ernest Borgnine does a great performance as himself, God rest his soul. And even though I was never in Scouts, I can tell that there are a lot of jokes here that, although I really like, they would be even funnier to someone who's been in Scouts, because you can tell that whoever commissioned this episode, or whoever looked it over, or maybe even the writers, they were in Scouts and probably hated it a lot, because there's a lot of stuff in here that really pokes fun at it every chance they get. Great to me, probably would be even better for a Scout. The Last Temptation of Homer, this is another really, really popular one. So there's a new girl named Mindy Simmons who comes to work at the power plant because, well, Mr. Burns only really hires men. And ducks. And Homer becomes very attracted to her, and he tries to prove that they have nothing in common, but it proves that they actually do, and he ends up starting to get closer and closer to her, and he's debating on whether or not he should have an affair or stay loyal to Marge. He, in his head, wants to stay loyal, but the rest of him doesn't. Meanwhile, Bart has to go through a lot of physical therapy and stuff that makes him into a nerd, and then he gets attacked by the kids at school, and then gets taken in by the nerds of Springfield Elementary. So let's start with the A-plot first. This is another one that really blends the story and the humor. Of course, we see a lot of the great jokes they have with Homer having the right stuff on his hand to quote-unquote break up with Mindy, and then he just sweats so much that he can't make any of it out. All the stuff they have at the con, and what he does in the hotel room to, come out with a little bit of extra stuff. But we also see the story side where he tries everything he can to stay loyal to his family, and in the end breaks down because he knows that that's the wrong thing to do, but he just feels like he's helpless against his urges. It's very well done. You really see just how much Homer cares, and even though, as I've said many times, he's an inconsiderable jerk, but deep down he really is a good person. It's just that his stupidity and impulsiveness can kind of distract from that sometimes. And Homer really does care, and this really proves it. The B-plot is all around perfect. I love it so much. It's just like, it perfectly starts off with parodying the doctor stuff where you go in for a slight checkup or you go in for one tiny little thing, and then it just leads to a whole bunch of escalating issues and checkups and inspections and all of that stuff. And then all the repercussions he has because he has to wear all this stuff and sound like Jerry Lewis sometimes. And then, of course, the nerd culture. Everything is perfect in the B-plot. A-plot is still really, really good, and this all gels to make an episode that totally deserves its reputation. I can totally see why this one caught on so much and is so loved by people everywhere. Because it really deserves it. Great story, great humor, great B-plot. Everything works so well with this. And that's Michelle Pfeiffer voicing Mindy, and she does a very good job, as pretty much all the Simpsons guest stars do back in the early days. In the early days, remember? Keep that in mind as we go on. Springfield, also known as when Springfield legalized gambling, but Springfield is spelled with a $, so ka-ching Pringfield, ka-ching Pringfield, I'll just do that. So, because Springfield is really going downhill, or even worse than it already is, they decide to legalize gambling, and Marge becomes a slot jockey. In other words, she becomes addicted to gambling, and we see just what that does to the family. And this doesn't seem out of character for Marge at all, because Marge is kind of a old-fashioned, in her ways, typical housewife, but it kind of makes sense that there's a darker side to her, and then a darker side that she doesn't really want to show, and especially doesn't want her family to know, because it's going to make them lose respect for her. And it's very clear here that she has to end up giving in because, well, the lure is just too strong. And of course there's all the stuff with Mr. Burns slowly becoming a hermit and becoming insane, or more insane, I guess. It depends on which episode he's in, but you get it. The casino jokes are great, and then Bart tries to do his own casino. This is one of those episodes that tries to do everything and actually pulls it off. A lot of the stuff that they do really works. Very, very rarely does a joke not hit its mark, and when it doesn't, it's just okay. But when it does hit, it's really, really good. See, a lot of the Simpsons episodes these days, or even actually midway on, try to do too much and end up hurting because of that. This one's got 4 or 5 plots to it, and they all feel natural and they all get equal amount of focus. So it's not fully about Marge, although that one does get the most focus. Overall, it's just about the town and seeing how this whole casino thing really changes lives. Because one of the things the writers used to do was say, okay, this character is in this scenario, so how would it affect this character, and this one, and this one, and this one? This is the pinnacle of that, where really, the whole thing is Mr. Burns creates a casino, and then we see how that affects everybody's lives. Of course, we don't get into stuff like the more tertiary characters like the Sea Captain or Bumblebee Man, but we get to see a lot of the main cast and what goes on with them. And it's a very good one that doesn't really get a lot of attention for some reason. Homer the Vigilante. So, Springfield keeps getting robbed and the police are still incompetent, as always, and can't solve the problem. So, Homer decides to go ahead and solve the problem himself. And of course, when you know that Homer is trying to stop a crime group, you know that that just does not work. This is a really simple one to describe, so this one won't take very long. All the jokes about security work very well. The twist of the cat burglar is extremely obvious, but I still think that it really works very well. And that the main thing that the cat burglar is targeting isn't a diamond, but it's cubic zirconia, which is considered to be pretty much worthless. It's a lot of really subtle stuff in here too, like that. And of course there's Lisa's jug and all, but back to what I was saying, a lot of the jokes in here are really subtle. You really gotta pay attention to what they're saying. There are always the obvious ones, as there are in every single episode, but this one really does make you pay attention to what's going on. Because there's stuff that goes on a lot in the foreground, but look into the background and listen closely to what they're saying. Then you'll be able to pick up on more, and then you'll like it even more. And that's all I gotta say about that. So Bart gets famous. Bart wanders off from his extremely boring field trip to the box factory. Oh, I love that. And then he goes into Krusty Studios, and then ends up kind of getting a job there, sort of. People don't really believe him, but he's got a job there. And then he accidentally poisons Sideshow Mel, so he's got to take his place. But he messes up in one of the sketches, but the mess up becomes so popular, he becomes the next big fad. But he doesn't believe it's a fad, he thinks it's here to stay. But then it doesn't stay, and of course everything goes back to normal in the end. This is another one of those that has just gotten so much attention and so much popularity. So many quotes and great scenes have come from this one, like the whole box factory. Everything in there is rolling on the floor hilarious, because it's so dull and boring, but yet Skinner and Martin are just so obsessed with it. And also how the guy at the box factory is trying to make it exciting, even though he himself is extremely boring, as well as the rest of the stuff going on there. There's also how Bart gets into the studio with the very, very famous scene where he goes over to the guard and he says, "Do you work here, little boy?" And Bart says, "Yeah." And he just goes, "Oh, okay, well, go right ahead in, sir." This episode has a lot of great quotes that have gotten down in history for being some of the best TV lines ever. And yeah, it shows, and it's a great episode to come from. This is one of those episodes where, When I watch the DVD, I'm like, oh yeah, this is a good one. I guess I'll watch it. But then every time I watch it, I'm always extremely thankful I did. Because it works super well. And I always forget just how well it works. The writing on this one is some of the best the show's ever had. And I can say that I'm glad that this one came out. And this one really is a famous episode. So good. A famous episode with the word famous in the title. Now we get on to Homer and Apu, my mom's personal favorite episode. And she doesn't even really like these kinds of shows, but she really, really likes this episode. Why? Well, this is another one that has every single joke in here hit the mark perfectly. Not only that, but it gets better and better and better as it goes on. It's like every minute the episode just improves in quality. And it already starts off really good with Homer getting poisoned at the Quickie Mart, but then Apu comes into their house and moves in with them, but he ends up really missing the Quickie Mart, so they try to get him his job back. Everything in here works fantastically. It just builds and builds and builds, and it even has a really cool fight scene at the end with a robber guy. There's also James Woods, who does a hilarious job in this one, where he wants to work at the Quickie Mart because he wants to study for his next movie. That's hilarious. It's great. There's also the stuff with Homer and Apu, as the title would suggest. It gave birth to that famous Who Needs the Quickie Mart song. What else can I say? The scene where they go to the Quickie Mart headquarters is one of my favorite scenes in the entire show. I'm not kidding. That is amazing. And you can tell that the jokes are coming, but it's the line delivery, the way that they do it, the pacing of that. Everything fell perfectly into place in that scene, and no matter how many times I watch it, which is a lot, I will laugh out loud guaranteed. This one is one of them that gets some attention, but not a ton, except for that song. If it wasn't for the song, I'm pretty sure people wouldn't really remember it, but this episode is more than just a framework for the song. This is some of the best writing they've ever had. It's extremely well done, and I'd say it's definitely worth your watch. We come on next to Lisa versus Malibu Stacy. So the first time that Malibu Stacy gets a focus, and believe it or not, the first Lisa episode in the season, and we're almost done. I'm not kidding. Of the 22 episodes in this season, this is episode 14, and only now do we get a real focus on Lisa. She got a very small part in Springfield, I guess that's a weird name to call it, but, well, this is the first time we really get a focus on her, and we really get to see Lisa's activism really get pushed in this. While it's not in that extremely leftist, complainy, whiny thing, this is from like a real place of genuine concern. Malibu Stacy finally comes out with a doll that talks, but all it does is spout sexist drivel. So what Lisa tries to do is at least first find the cause of the problem, but then she wants to do whatever she can to fix it by contacting Malibu Stacy's original creator, Stacy Lavelle. But not before coming to Smithers for help. And this is easily the best part of the entire episode. Although Smithers has an extremely small part in this, it is so funny. Because, well, the first time he's in this episode is the Malibu Stacy instructional video on how it came to be and what happened, which that video alone is great. But then we see that Waylon Smithers, a man in his 40s from Springfield, owns the world's largest Malibu Stacy collection. And for those who don't know, Malibu Stacy is basically Barbie. And it leads up to this big reveal too, and it pans around this pink room with all these dolls on the walls, and it says, like, and this is the person with the world's largest Malibu Stacy collection, Waylon Smithers! Oh, Malibu Stacy fans, I'll see you at StacyCon 94. And then, of course, Lisa comes to his place for help on finding Malibu Stacy, or Stacy Lavelle, as she's really called. And, of course, we get that famous computer joke, but everything with Smithers in this works great. But the episode isn't just Smithers, because, well, he's only in for, like, I don't know, at most 2 minutes. All the jokes they have about toys and collectors and dolls and stuff are great. I mean, I don't really know very much about dolls or all that, but I get all the jokes that they're talking about. For one, that Stacy Lavelle's former husbands are all toys, whether they be G.I. Joe or superhero toys or race toys. It's funny. It's really good. the lengths that the Malibu Stacy company tries to go to stop Lisa's plan. And then that great ending that is just a huge, hilarious crashing down moment of no optimism, but then at the end leaves a little spark and a little bit of hope. Then there's Grandpa's part, which I think is just as good as the other part. He feels useless and old because, well, everyone hates his complaining because the whole first third is just him complaining and whining and causing a lot of trouble, which I still think is really, really funny because of all the dumb things he complains about. So he gets a job at Krusty Burger, and it's just Grandpa at Krusty Burger. That alone tells you why it works. The episode is very well done and very, very funny. Deep Space Homer is one of the most, if not the most famous episode from this season. We all know about this one. Homer goes into space, and then just hijinks ensue. That's basically all you need to know about the episode is Homer goes in space. And it also has Buzz Aldrin in it. Yeah, the actual Buzz Aldrin is in this episode, and it works very, very, very well. He does a great job and gets to say that awesome line, "Careful, they're ruffled." All the space jokes and all the training jokes work. This is another one of those that every single joke hits the mark. Every single one does. This one really deserves its popularity, and so many people have talked about it. I don't know what new it can bring to the table, so let's just move on to Homer Loves Flanders. So normally, Homer Simpson despises Flanders with every single bone in his body, and some in other people's bodies too, because there's just so much hate you can't even fit it in that giant man. But for once, he finally sees that Ned is a good person, because Ned brings him to a football game that he really wants to go to. And he has a great time there, and he and Ned become friends. But then the tables start to turn when Homer becomes the one that's really hated, because he just won't stop being an overbearing, know-nothing friend who just doesn't get the hint. And Ned tries to be a good neighbor and tries to get Homer to leave him alone, but he just won't take the hint. He just keeps trying harder and harder and harder. Does this feel right for Homer's character? Of course it does. Because Homer is this kind of guy. He doesn't really have a ton of friends. He's got Lenny, he's got Carl, he's got Moe, he's got Barney, and, well, aside from Marge, of course, that's kind of it. And even before this whole Homer and Flanders thing starts, there's a lot of great jokes like the 30,000 tickets thing. Oh, that part gets me every time. But every single thing in this really works. The ending sort of kind of lets up on the jokes and kind of has a really stupid, randomly changing ending, especially after that really sweet speech Homer makes. But aside from the kind of lame ending, I think this episode is just very well done. You can tell they worked really hard on this one, and that they really had this one kicking around for a long time, because it really gives off that feeling of a season 4, season 3 episode. This would fit right along with When Flanders Failed. But it didn't come out at that time, but yeah, we're glad we got it now. Bart gets an elephant, another really popular one. So Bart wins a radio contest, and there's a gag prize of an elephant or a bunch of money. Bart doesn't want the money, he wants the elephant, but because it was a gag thing and no one's supposed to take that prize, they don't have one. So that turns into this big scandal, and then KBBL, the news place, or the radio place, which they are news, but you get it, they send over an elephant, and then it's just, the best way I can describe it is the Simpsons get an elephant. That alone tells you everything that goes on in here. Every so often you'll hit a flat joke or a joke that doesn't quite work, but overall this one is just so well done. Again, it's probably a tiny bit overrated in my mind because there are episodes like Homer and Apu, or another one coming up in just a couple episodes, that I think deserve more attention in this season, and that's not including stuff like Selma's Choice from season 4. This one, I think it's good. It's definitely good. It's very well done, but it just doesn't rise above a lot of the other episodes in this one. It's got a lot of good stuff in it, but it's just one of those episodes that, yeah, it's really, really good, but there's just other stuff that's a bit better than it. That's all I can say. Burns is Air, so another Mr. Burns-centric episode, and also kind of Bart. So Mr. Burns has a near-death experience with a sponge. Oh, I love that. And then he realizes that he needs an heir because he doesn't have an heir to his fortune. So he tries out a lot of kids at Springfield and they all suck, except Nelson, but he doesn't end up going with Nelson for some reason. That always confuses me. But Bart ends up trying to get revenge, but that revenge wins Burns over and Bart becomes his heir. But Mr. Burns has a plan. He's trying to win Bart over from his family so that he'll live with him forever and become a mini Burns in a sense. And he's trying to buy Bart's loyalty and buy Bart's love. And hopefully he can do that and then get his son that he kind of always wanted. It kind of hints that. And of course, there's a great reason for why Smithers can't inherit it all, but I don't dare ruin it. We see a lot of the stuff going through Bart's head that he does start believing what Mr. Burns is telling him. And we see just how sad the family is without Bart, even if he does cause a lot of unneeded and unnecessary destruction. They miss him dearly. It's got a good bit of heart in here, and all the jokes that they throw in are really well done. Basically, it does the same thing that Rosebud and Last Temptation of Homer do, and does exactly the same quality. So now we get to that episode that I think really needs more attention. We have one of those in every season, and this is the one I think needs way more. Sweet Seymour Skinner's song. This one really needs more attention, I think. So Skinner gets fired, and then Bart feels really bad about getting him fired. So he tries to kind of be friends with Skinner, really. Yeah, he doesn't try to get him the job back, he just tries to be friends with him and make him feel happy again. Bart gets a relieved conscience and everything, but he still feels a little guilty deep down. And of course we see just how much Springfield Elementary means to Principal Skinner. Principal Skinner is kind of one of those stiff, stagnant characters who doesn't really get much development. And with the exception of that episode where he falls in love with Patty, which I can't really remember off the top of my head, but I said I really liked, he doesn't really get a lot of development, but this one we really see just how much it means to him. First of all, he didn't even really like the army that much, but this gives him a sense of belonging, a sense of importance, because all these children look up to him, and he feels like he's the reason that these kids can have a future, and this is what he finds pride in. This is what he really loves doing. But now, thanks to Chalmers and Bart too, and a little bit of Santa's Little Helper, he can't do that anymore, and he's kind of going through a sort of, not existential crisis, but he's going through sort of secret depression. He doesn't want anyone to really see it. And then of course Ned Flanders becomes the next principal. That alone is great. And how he puts everyone on the honor system, and if you know anything about Springfield Elementary, the last thing you could think of when you hear that name is honor. I'd go on longer, but for one, this is already pretty long, and there's just so many things in here that you gotta see for yourself. So check out this episode and you won't regret it. The Boy Who Knew Too Much. I don't know why, but I always think this is an earlier episode, like season 3, but it's not, it's 5. I have no idea why I think that, but let's carry on. So Bart plays hooky, and then he accidentally witnesses a crime at the Quimby mansion with Mayor Quimby's nephew and a French butler. Meanwhile, Skinner knows that Bart ditched school, so he goes around finding him, but does such a bad job of finding him because he's so out of touch with what kids like. That's a great B-plot, and then the B-plot kind of changes midway through. Yeah, we're back to one of those where the plot just kind of changes. So then the B-plot goes from Principal Skinner trying to find Bart to when the court case starts, it's Homer trying to stall the jury as long as he can so he can get the free dinner and the free hotel and the free Willy. Think of Jury Duty with Pauly Shore, but actually funny. And the abrupt change in story doesn't bother me at all. It's a simple episode and it's pretty good overall. Lady Bouvier's lover. So, Marge and Homer realize just how lonely their parents are. You know, the ones that are still around. And then they try to fix him up, despite Homer's somewhat objections. And they do start bonding together. And then, of course, Mr. Burns has to come in and swoop in and try to override it. This is another good episode, a very well done one. We kind of see some more stuff with Grandpa. That's cool. And we see a lot of him this season, I realized. It's a really Grandpa-heavy season. Not that there's anything wrong with that. In fact, that's actually great, because Grandpa's such a great character. But yeah, just kind of something I noticed. We also see more of Grandma Bouvier and how she's not just a raspy old crank. She's actually really lonely and she's got kind of a wild history. Really, the episode just kind of goes downhill when Mr. Burns comes in. Before that, it's really funny, especially with the lawyer jokes that they do with the Charlie Chaplin stuff. But when Mr. Burns comes in and tries to take over and all, I feel like the episode kind of lags a little. It doesn't go completely down, it just goes from very good to decent. And for an episode that was doing really well, it's very noticeable when it dips. But still, the episode's good overall, and that little bit of lag doesn't really hurt it. So, Secrets of a Successful Marriage, the last episode of the season. We're finally here, folks. Yay! So Homer starts a marriage counseling class and a Secrets to a Successful Marriage kind of class, but he accidentally reveals legitimate secrets, like secrets about him and Marge's intimate life. And of course, that's why everyone keeps coming to his class, because they just want to hear that stuff. They don't want to hear about Homer actually talking about stuff, although, of course, since Homer is teaching the class, he doesn't talk about that stuff at all, because he's just so inept and brainless. And, of course, Marge finds out and then gets furious at Homer. Then we get to the second half where Homer tries to pay for what he's done and ends up losing his mind. And I love it. Unlike the others with abrupt transitions, this one feels natural because it's Homer paying for what he did. But he feels really, really bad, but he doesn't know how to fix it. And then there's the tree mother joke in there. I love that. Then there's Moe trying to move in on Marge, he thinks that the marriage is over, but she's just really mad at him. The class thing kind of gets dropped, but to be fair, it makes sense because it's not like Homer's going to go back to teaching it after what's happened to him. Of course, the classes are great, not just Homer's classes, but the other ones that they have in there, like the orange eating class. There's also a bunch of little jokes in there, a little bit of school jokes here and there that they didn't have time for in Homer Goes to College. It kind of gives off that vibe where there's a lot of the jokes that couldn't fit in there they put in here, like the jacket jokes. But even still, it's great. It's a really good one overall. I've called a lot of stuff great in here, I know, but this is a great, great season. So as you can tell, it gets the Archibald seal of approval. Yep, this is the best season so far. I know I raved and raved and raved about season 4, but this one's even better than that. Because while that one did have some shaky parts, this one really fixes that. And the humor is much better too. It's much more well defined. Whether it be a bigger reliance on pop culture or just snappier pace, whatever they're doing, it works really well. This is another one of those seasons where not a single episode in here was bad, and it was just about impossible to decide a least favorite. What one was it? You'll find out in just a minute after I name my favorite. To no one's surprise, my favorite is still Cape Fear, because, well, that one's just my favorite episode. I can't really refute that. But I'd be remiss if I didn't go over the runners-up, because there were a lot of runners-up for the list. Boy Scouts in the Hood, Last Temptation of Homer, Homer and Apu, Lisa vs. Malibu Stacy, Deep Space Homer, Homer Loves Flanders, and Sweet Seymour Skinner's song. And if I had to pick a number 2 spot, it would certainly be Homer and Apu. But picking a least favorite is one of the hardest things to do for this season, because even some of the episodes that were a bit weaker, they're still great, they're still fantastic. And they definitely beat out some of even the best ones in the early couple seasons. By that I mean 1 and 2 and some of 3. It took me days to think of a least favorite, but I guess it would have to be Marge on the Lamb, I guess. But even still, it's far, far from bad. It's really good. But if I have to pick a least favorite, it kind of has to be that one. I don't know what that says about the season, except for that it's very well done and probably one of the best seasons of all time. Clearly. This one did great things for the show and kept making it even more popular. There's not many big milestones it could take because, in terms of popularity, because The Simpsons was already, like I said, unstoppable. And this one kept cementing it. It kept winning over more fans. With great episodes and very, very good celebrity appearances. This one is the season that really starts having a celebrity in about half the episodes. And sometimes it's very obvious, sometimes it's not. But they do it very well, and I can certainly say that this one so far is the best season. Will Season 6 top it? There's only one way to find out. Tune in on Season 6.
Good night, everybody.